So season 3 of Invincible just dropped, and I thought it was pretty solid, and having read the comics, I thought it'd be fun to do a comparison of what season 3 is to the comic chapters it adapted. I don't have a video like this for the first 2 seasons, but if you guys like it, leave a like, subscribe, and maybe I'll do one on the first 2. Compared to season 1 and 2, season 3 is pretty close to the comics. In the early seasons of the show, a lot of stuff was changed. Things were expanded upon, like the death of the Guardians of the Globe, in the comic being 1 page, but in the show, we get an actual fight between Nolan and the members of the Guardians of the Globe that turned out to be one of the best fight scenes in the entire show. We then have a lot of things that were moved around or intertwined, so the pacing of the show was a lot faster than it is in the comics, like the revival of the Immortal being tied to the Mauler twins creating Robot's new body. And then there were just a lot of things that were removed from the comics, mostly because they were unnecessary plots that were self-contained enough to not actually have any adverse effects to removing them from the adaptation. In comparison to the first 2 seasons, season 3 has very little removed. But we're just gonna go in chronological order, episode by episode. Episode 1 starts with Mark fighting the Giant during a training montage. Cecil's been trying to find ways for Mark to exercise since the Viltrumite Anissa showed up and kicked his ass. Most of this training montage is new. We don't have scenes in these chapters of him increasing his speed by flying to the moon and back, staying under lava as long as possible, or sparring with the Giant. The only thing we have in the comics is this scene where he's using some sort of weightlifting device. We've started a couple pages into issue 46, the first few pages of which go over the fact Duplicate is still alive, something that was covered in the finale of season 2. In the comic, it's also done differently, with Kate saying she's revealed herself so Immortal can help stop her brother before he does something stupid. While Invincible is weightlifting, Rexplode shows up. He was there to get his new hand calibrated after it was bitten off by a member of the Lizard League in the last season. This also happens in the comic, but in the show they threw in a joke about him not being able to give a middle finger, which apparently is his favorite finger. Donald gets word someone's trying to steal the Declaration of Independence, and Invincible and Rex are sent to deal with it. And while easily battling the 2 martial artists responsible for the heist, Rex and Invincible talk about Eve, Rex thinking that he should just go for it and date her. But their conversation and fight is interrupted after Rex is ambushed by Multipol, the brother of Duplicate, who starts beating the ever-living shit out of him, believing he's the reason his sister is dead. There was an additional bit added right before this, where a scientist in the Pentagon talks into a ring he has. This is presumably how Paul was aware of where Rex was. While Invincible is distracted by Multipol, the 2 martial artists escape into a portal with the Declaration of Independence. Massive L. Invincible starts killing a bunch of Multipols, trying to save Rex, until Kate reveals herself to be alive, stopping the fight. This does play out slightly differently in the comic, with Multipol accusing Rex of working with the Lizard League, because that's the only way he believes anyone as powerful as his sister could die. He also believed Rex had a motive, that being Kate leaving him for the Immortal. In the comic, Mark also needs a little more convincing before he starts killing Multipols. At this point in the story, he's still grappling with the fact that he killed Angstrom Levy, but in this situation, he's able to rationalize that as long as he doesn't kill every Multipol, he's basically not killing anyone. In the comic, Rex is actually the one that tries to rationalize it for Mark, but even then it still requires a more dire situation than in the show for him to start killing. The conversation between Kate and Paul also goes a bit differently, with Paul still convinced that Rex had something to do with Kate's death. They don't get to talk about it much longer before Mark knocks him out, same as in the show. We then cut to a scene of Invincible getting home as Oliver is finishing up schoolwork. This scene is an adaptation of the last few pages of issue 42. The 2 boys are playing catch as Mark tells him about the fight he was just in. Oliver makes Mark promise that once he gets his powers, they'll be able to fight crime together. Believing it'll still be quite a while before he gets his powers, Mark agrees, which is when Oliver reveals that he already got his powers and that he's been keeping it a secret from their mom. Since this happens at a different time in the comics, a lot of the conversation is different. Oliver inquiring how long it took for Mark to get his powers. Before the reveal, he already has his. We then cut to Kate revealing to the Guardians that not only is she still alive, but her and the Immortal have now gotten engaged. This isn't a massive change from the comics, but the order of how stuff happened is different. It's revealed in issue 38 that Kate and Immortal snuck off to go get married. 2 issues later, she's presumed to be dead after the fight with the Lizard League. The fact that they just got married was supposed to make it that much worse when the Immortal was off in space when she ended up dying. And it's not revealed for 6 entire issues that she's still alive, while in the show it's revealed 2 episodes later in the season 2 finale. This scene also shows the return of Shrinking Ray, one of the biggest changes from the comics. Shrinking Ray is a male in the comics and is much more of a background character who was killed off in a single frame during the Lizard League fight. In the show, Shrinking Ray was also presumed to be dead by the same method of being eaten alive, in what was one of the grossest deaths in the entire show for me. The first time I saw this, I was disgusted. Guys, I'm telling you, the sound design is horrendous. Never have I heard something so disgusting in a cartoon. But she apparently survived being eaten alive and is now back on the Guardians of the Globe. There's also a bit of hinting that her and Rex are kind of hitting it off. To save time, I'm gonna skip scenes that aren't too important, like the scene of Cecil and Donald noticing a bunch of geological phenomenon, and Mark and his mother discussing Oliver's new powers. They're just not really important for the comparison, and we don't want to be here all day. We want to get to the good shit. Next, we cut to a bowling alley, where William and Rick are talking to Mark about Eve. Mark explains that after he killed Angstrom Levy, he was saved by a future version of the Guardians of the Globe, and that version of Eve confessed her love for him. William thinks he shouldn't mention this to Eve, but should ask her out anyways. Rick then experiences chest pain from the cyborg experiments done on him by D.A. Sinclair in the first season. This scene is a loose adaptation of the first few pages of issue 48. The biggest difference in how this plays out is that by this point, William is nowhere near as flamboyantly gay in the comic, and in fact, he remains in the closet for a lot of it. Rick, William, and Mark are out bowling, but when they go to leave, Rick has a breakdown. Not because he's in any physical pain, but he still has trauma from the experiments done on him, and has trouble feeling human. This scene absolutely gets nerfed in the TV show. It is way less emotional, and they basically just leave this little line in about him having heart problems as a type of foreshadowing to bring D.A. Sinclair back into the conversation for events that are going to happen later in the episode. Mark heads to Eve's place to try to muster up the courage to ask her out. Before he can do that, we learn that Eve is planning on going to college to take classes on engineering and architecture. You kind of need to understand those things if you plan to help reconstruct a building with your powers. This also only exists in the adaptation because in the comic, she doesn't just fuck off to the woods. She fucks off to Africa. She is not worried about fixing buildings because she's busy helping starving Ugandan children. Mark then begins trying to ask her out, and it is by far the cringiest shit ever. Man's got zero riz. He makes it even worse by fucking it up and mentioning the future version of Eve, causing her to question if he even actually wants to date her or is only doing it because the future version of her said something. The biggest difference about how this happens in the comic is that it's actually Eve who comes to Invincible asking him if he's ready to date now in issue 43. She also reveals that part of the reason she fucked off all the way to Africa was to get away from Mark because it was painful to see him with Amber. But it still goes no better in the comics when Mark opens his retarded mouth and says basically the same thing about future Eve. The show streamlines this entire debacle by combining his fuck up telling her about future Eve with the time he comes to apologize to her, which both now happen right before Invincible gets a call that the majority of superheroes across the country have all been captured. We cut to Underground, where Doc Seismic has allegedly kidnapped all the heroes in the country. I say allegedly because compared to the comic, there's quite a few people missing. Rex also has his ass hanging out because he was abducted fresh out the shower. Compared to the comics, Doc Seismic is way more political. In the comic, he is just a two-dimensional villain who decides to destroy Mount Rushmore. In the show, he's doing it because they're racist. He doesn't just have a doctorate in seismology, he also has an undergrad in sociology, women's studies, and a minor in African dance studies. He is a true feminist. This season, he's decided to capture all of the fascist superheroes who are doing nothing but supporting the system of capitalism. I really do enjoy his over-the-top bullshit. It plays very well. It makes his character way more fun than just mad scientist. Invincible and Eve arrive, and Doc Seismic calls in his legion of underground monsters. Cecil, seeing the two aren't holding out well, decides to call in some of his morally dubious projects to assist. In the comic, there are two people able to escape the pods, Wolfman and Zachariah, a werewolf and vampire duo from another Image comic series called The Astounding Wolfman, which was actually a spin-off of Invincible. For whatever reason, the adaptation doesn't include these characters or other IPs we've seen in the comic like Brit or Savage Dragon. We can argue they kept it down to Invincible and Eve as to not confuse the viewer as to who the fuck this wolf and cloud of smoke are. In the show, Eve gets knocked out by Doc Seismic, while in the comic, she gets knocked out by one of the worm creatures. Invincible is also grabbed by one of the worms and gets his head crushed between its little grabby thingies, which almost knocks him unconscious, but he perseveres enough to kill it by slamming its tentacles back into its own head. Crawling out of its mouth, he takes 2 more steps towards Doc Seismic before eating shit and passing out, and is then put into a cocoon with Eve. In the show, Eve is knocked out by Seismic, and what I believe was an easily dodgeable attack if she didn't pause to reboot reboot her brain, Mark is then pinned by one of the centipede creatures, and this injury is what throws him into a disoriented state before Seismic knocks him out. In the comic and the show, this is when Cecil's backup arrives in the form of D.A. Sinclair's Reaniman, along with a new Darkwing, who breaks out the other heroes as the main fight begins. Invincible is not at all happy to see Reaniman after what he and his friends have been through. By this point in the show, about 38 minutes into the season, we can already tell there's a massive drop in animation quality. Invincible has had its moments of poor animation in the past. I used one as an example of what I call the popsicle stick effect, when animators take a still image and slide it around to try and give it the illusion of motion. When done poorly, it can look like someone taped a popsicle stick to an image and is just sliding it around. My favorite moment of bad animation is the adaptation only scene of Cecil trying to slow down Omni-Man. After hitting him with a low orbital ion cannon, a number of birds are seen as still images just slowly moving down till they hit the ground. It's pretty funny, but I could overlook stuff like that because why not save money for cool fights? Problem is, I can't explain to you where the budget went for season 3 to look the way it does. Having watched the entire thing, it doesn't appear that they've held their load in to blow the budget on some grand fight scene. There's rumors it had to do with Amazon rushing the animation team after the success of the first 2 seasons, but I don't really have any information to back that besides how fast this season came out. But if I see any blatant bad animation, I'm gonna point it out. Like, look at this schmuck. Robot is literally just a static PNG shooting energy blasts out of his non-moving hands. I could understand why a fan of the show would be upset by stuff like this, but listen, I just came off doing a 2-part breakdown of Uzumaki, an anime that was done so dirty that the entire animation team was fired after a single episode, and the rest of the show had to be drawn with fucking crayons by whatever crackhead they could find in the Denny's parking lot. You could say my standards are lower than the average bear because compared to that, none of this really bothers me, but it definitely appears they adjusted the story to avoid having to animate stuff that would have taken more time, like the way both Invincible and Eve are knocked out. Seismic decides that if he's going down, he's taking everyone with him, but before he can do anything, he's pulled into the Shadowverse by Darkwing. With their leader knocked out of the fight, the underground creatures disperse. Now that the fighting has settled down, Mark is furious that Darkwing isn't in prison after murdering a number of criminals in season 1, or that D.A. Sinclair's Reaniman technology is being used. Darkwing says he's making up for his past actions, but Mark doesn't care and flies off to confront Cecil. In the comic, we have a cut scene of Eve and Mark discussing how the news of Darkwing's murders must have been covered up by Cecil and the Global Defense Agency, before he heads to the Pentagon to confront Cecil himself. Back in the show, Mark tells Cecil how he thinks people like Darkwing and D.A. Sinclair should be locked away for good. Cecil rebuts by arguing that after reforming them, they're better off helping protect the world to make up for their crimes. In the comic, the situation escalates after D.A. Sinclair accidentally walks in on the two talking, which further pisses off Mark, as he was told the Global Defense Agency was only using his designs, not that Sinclair was freely working on them. As tensions increase and Mark refuses to let it go, Cecil brings him to the White Room, revealing Mark is surrounded by Reaniman. As Cecil feels threatened by Mark's refusal to back down, we get a post-credit scene that begins to adapt a bit of issue 55. Alan the alien, locked down but not out. I really like Alan as a character, and he's voiced by Seth Rogen, so if I had a nickel for every time Seth Rogen voiced a one-eyed test tube science experiment, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's crazy it's happened twice. The comic quickly skims over Alan and Nolan's friendship developing, using narration boxes to quickly catch the viewer up until the moment the action begins. The show gives us way more dialogue between the two, as well as Nolan giving off a different tone than in the comic. In the show, he doesn't seem to have any intention of escaping, having accepted his fate for betraying the Viltrum Empire, and Alan is trying to convince him that he should join in the fight, seeing that Nolan is changing as a person, showing signs that he cares for Alan after learning he's alive after an execution attempt. Episode 2 starts off by adapting the secret origins of Cecil Stedman, which is the latter half of issue 50. We get a lot more than in the comic, and it plays a lot better in my opinion. Cecil enters some hippie establishment, pulling a gun on the owner, and walks into the back. He looks around before calling into his radio that the tip they got was a bust. After opening a crate, he finds what he appears to be looking for, an ominous container of green liquid. The hippie is revealed to be an eco-terrorist, a part of the Order of the Freeing Fist. She takes his radio and his gun before beating the shit out of him while monologuing, explaining why their group wants to kill the entire city. Hippy Dippy returned to nature type shit. Cecil manages to tase her, but before he can dismantle the bomb, a man named Force Fist appears and continues beating the shit out of him. Before we hear police sirens in the background, Cecil's message over the radio turned out to be code. Deciding this is the end and not caring about death anyways, the two eco-terrorists activate the bomb. As the green gas excretes from the container, their skin instantly begins melting away. Cecil jumps up and shoves the two into the box while holding it closed with his body. The gas still seeps through the cracks, melting all of his skin away as hazmat-suited GDA workers bust in to save him. I think this plays out way better than the comics, and the music during this part just fits the tone so well. Cecil is much more proactive in stopping the bomb in the show compared to the comics, where we only see him tied to the bomb before it goes off. He's also saved by Britt instead of random hazmat guys. Britt is basically a walking tank. Super durable, stuff like acid, fire, bullets. He don't give a fuck about any of it. In the comic, he's also the one who meets Cecil after his skin replacement. But in the show, it's GDA director Radcliffe. Cecil asks how many people died, and thanks to his sacrifice, only 17 did. A far cry from the thousands of people in the city the eco-terrorists planned on killing. Radcliffe points out how the skin graft missed a spot, but Cecil explains it was the only skin on his body that could be recovered, so he had them leave it, as a reminder to never make the same mistakes that caused those deaths. Years later, the Pentagon is under attack by the Lizard League, and Cecil is trying to carry an injured director Radcliffe to safety. Komodo Dragon appears and charges the two, but is intercepted by the Order of the Freeing Fist duo. Cecil is furious that they aren't dead or in prison, and shows his thanks for them saving him by shooting them both in the head, not caring at all that Director Radcliffe had reformed them. For murder, Cecil is taken to a maximum security prison full of different supervillains. His new cellmate is some giant blue guy, who apparently sent his last roommate out in a bucket. As the cell door closes, he turns to his new roomie and simply says, "Hi, what's your name?" We cut to 3 years later, the prison looks much less violent, and the big blue guy calls Cecil boss, telling him he has a visitor. It's Director Radcliffe, who's come to offer up his position. He's been watching Cecil all these years, and this was his rehabilitation. His time in the prison had been spent bringing order to dozens of chaotic villains, learning to work with and cooperate together for everyone's mutual benefit. Radcliffe tells Cecil that you can be the good guy or the guy who saves the world, but you can't be both. Cecil obviously took the job, and from then on spent his years doing everything he can to protect Earth, including reforming previous villains to better help his cause. In the comic, this part is less fleshed out as well, Cecil being visited only a few months after being in prison, where the conversation is roughly the same, the biggest difference being there's no sign he helped reform any prisoners. I really like how it's done in the show. Fleshing out his character makes him come off as far more competent than in the comic. Fights in this episode have also been far better than the two fights we got in the last episode. Very fluid hand-to-hand combat. We cut back to where we left off at the end of the last episode, Mark and Cecil in the White Room. As Cecil explains, he feels like Mark is threatening him. Mark snaps and starts tearing apart Reaniman, Cecil telling him to stand down so they can talk this out. Mark responds by destroying all the Reaniman and asking if that's all Cecil's got. Cecil responds by dropping the White Room protocol and revealing that Mark is surrounded by hundreds of Reaniman. Mark rushes in to kill more, forcing Cecil to press some sort of button that cripples him. Cecil explains they analyzed the noise made by the sea monster he fought in season 2 and recreated the frequency, which can be played at will through a second earpiece they hid deep inside of his ear. The means by which Mark is crippled is the same in the comic. Viltrumite's ears are their weak point, as they're needed to help them fly. But in the comic, they put the earpiece in after Mark's fight with his father, and instead of it being a frequency developed during a fight with the underwater sea monster, it was just a hunch by Cecil and the team that throwing off the equilibrium of the Viltrumite could be an effective method of fighting them. Mark is shocked Cecil would put a weapon inside of him, feeling Cecil must have never trusted him in the first place. He quickly jets off to the Guardians HQ and frantically begs Robot to remove the device. Cecil arrives and Mark tells the Guardians that he's trying to kill him, and when Mark brings up that he's working with murderers, he's told it isn't a debate before Cecil hits the button again, which terrifies the Guardians of the Globe. And as Reaniman teleport in, the Guardians are not on board with it and begin fighting them off, which leads to Rex blowing up the switch Cecil was using to stun Mark. This backfires, however, since it was a dead man's switch, and the signal now can't be shut off. As the Reaniman beat the shit out of Mark and the Guardians, Cecil tells HQ to shut them off, but before they can, Robot blocks the frequency, and Mark absolutely decimates the Reaniman. In a scene of violence very reminiscent to the aftermath left behind from Omni-Man's fight with the Guardians. In the comic, this is only the second time the Reanimen have been used in the field, the first being against Doc Seismic in the prior issue. Cecil quickly regrets sicking the Reanimen on Mark, and afraid they're going to kill him, he tells Sinclair to shut them all down. But by the time Cecil steps back through the portal, Robot has already blocked the signal and Mark has killed all the Reanimen on top of him. Cecil seems way more like a force to be reckoned with in the show. Cecil calls Mark a hypocrite for going off to help his murderous father in season 2, while giving no one else a chance at redemption. He tells Mark to never threaten him again, before Mark immediately threatens him again, saying if Cecil ever comes near his family, he'll kill him, before leaving with Robot to remove the weapon from his ear. In the comic, this is where Cecil's backstory is revealed, being the second half of the issue, while the entire falling out with Mark was the first half. In the show, the end of Cecil's backstory is saved for the end of the episode. But for now, we cut to a family discussion about the fallout, Mark explaining how he threatened to kill Cecil if he came near them. Oliver, being 0.000% human, doesn't understand why Mark didn't just kill him, so he'd no longer be a problem. Debbie explains that they don't kill, and that Mark was only threatening Cecil to be taken seriously. Eve and Mark continue the conversation about Cecil on the roof, until the subject shifts to their previous discussion about dating. Eve explains that she felt humiliated by the thought of a version of her that was well into her 30s and still hadn't moved past losing Mark. This part is technically in the comic, but the conversation is completely different. Mark explains that Robot, Monster Girl, Rex, and Bulletproof are leaving the Guardians of the Globe. This info is instead adapted into the next scene, where the team breaks up during the cleanup of the Reanimen corpses. We then get another adapted scene of Debbie trying to get back into the dating scene with the fellow real estate agent. She has a hard time dancing around the fact her kids have superpowers, and her date Paul basically starts thinking they're retarded or something by the way she's speaking about their special challenges. We then get a scene that adapts part of issue 21, as Cecil introduces Nightwing back into the Guardians of the Globe, which is now still down 3 members after his addition. We then cut to the end of Cecil's backstory. After he becomes director, he feels his employees don't respect him because of his criminal record. This is before Omni-Man is spotted defeating a massive sea creature. Cecil says he wants to fly over to talk to the man himself. After introducing himself, Nolan explains his whitewashed Viltrumite origin and claims that he's been sent to the planet to help protect it. After Cecil's return, he knows immediately from the team's scans that Nolan is lying. He doesn't know why he's lying, but he says he doesn't care either. As long as he continues to help, they'll work on finding countermeasures until the day they're needed to stop whatever he's planned. The episode ends with Cecil repeating the same words Director Radcliffe said to him all those years ago. We can be the good guys or the guys that save the world. We can't be both. With his origin wrapped up, this basically explains that he used to think very similar to how Mark does right now. But over time he began seeing the bigger picture and realized everything's not so black and white. We then get a post-credit scene of Mark and Eve on the Golden Gate Bridge, the old teen team's HQ. Mark tells Eve that when he was close to death fighting Cecil, all he could think about was her. The two finally decide to officially start dating and seal the deal with a kiss. This dialogue is actually the conversation that happened in the backyard earlier in the comic, and I'm pretty certain the only reason this was moved to an adaptation only post-credit scene was so we could get a much more romantic setting for the duo's first kiss in the show, and I don't really mind it that much. But in the comic, their first kiss happens in issue 38, when Mark cheats on Amber by kissing Eve after Amber cockblocked him to study for an exam. Episode 3 starts by adapting issue 47 into a gay love story between two villains we've seen in previous seasons, Tether Tyrant and Magmaniac. To be fair, I guess you could read this in the comic as kind of low-key gay, but the low-key gay stuff doesn't start happening until like issue 83. In the comic, these two escaped from prison and are attempting to live a life free of crime. The biggest difference from the show, besides the fact they're fucking gay, is that Tether Tyrant has some sort of symbiotic relationship with his armor, similar to that of the Venom symbiote in the Spider-Man comics. It's some sort of alien he talks to like a pet or a toddler. The two decide that going straight isn't working for them, and they decide to go back to crime. In the show, the sequence is done silently, with a classical score called Criminal Lives playing over it. Very artsy, kinda gay if you ask me. Their attempted bank robbery is interrupted by Invincible, and during the fight, Oliver jumps in and saves him. After knocking out the gay lovers, Mark scolds Oliver for using his powers and intervening in a real fight. From here, we get a couple of show-only scenes. Mark and Debbie scolding Oliver, even Amber chatting about life in college, including Eve telling Amber Mark and her are dating now. now. Amber mentions her new boyfriend Kyle, which is a change from the comic, where Amber's boyfriend after Mark is named Gary. She started talking to him before Mark and her broke up, emotionally cheating on Mark to cope with the neglect she felt from him never being around. In the comic, Mark and Amber's breakup is mutual, but only happened after Mark overheard a conversation where she had made up her mind to fully cheat on him in the future. The whole thing is fucked, but Mark is no saint either, having kissed Eve way before any of this happened in the comic. In the comic, after their breakup, Amber's love life doesn't go the smoothest, because in issue 56, she calls Mark and asks him to come over, where she reveals her boyfriend has anger issues and gave her a black eye. The moment Mark sees this, he loses his shit. Despite their relationship not working out, he still loves and cares about Amber. So he finds her boyfriend, takes him to the top of a skyscraper, and dangles him upside down over the edge of a building. There's a number of reasons for this to be in the comic, but the biggest is to demonstrate that Mark has a problem with his temper, and it's gotten more noticeable by this time in the story. But I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say this issue is probably gonna be left on the cutting room floor. The now former Guardians of the Globe move back into the previous Teen Team headquarters. This scene adapts a part of issue 51, but expands on it by adding focus on Ray and Rex. As I explained earlier, Ray is a dude in the comic and not even alive by this point. But in the show, she shares her backstory of practically being forced into being a small town superhero when her parents discovered she had powers, while Rex explains his backstory of being sold to the government for them to turn him into a weapon. In the comic, we actually learn a lot of the characters' backstories around the time Mark meets up with his father on Thraxa. Rexplode has one of the shittiest backstories in the entire comic. He wasn't born with powers, his family was dirt poor, and things only got worse for him when one day Director Radcliffe offered to buy the boy from his family. From then on, he was trained by the government to become their own personal assassin. His bone density was altered to make him stronger, and his skeleton was enhanced with the ability to molecularly charge any inorganic object into an explosive. He later escaped the government to find out what happened to his parents, and what he found was devastating. His parents sold him away so they could live a better life, even having another kid, not seeming to at all care what happened to him. It's very apparent that Rex has taken a hard look at how he's acted and is trying to improve. After his close encounter with death by the hands of the Lizard League, he's been doing his best to be less of an asshole to everyone around him. The show takes it a step further and starts to show a relationship blossoming between Ray and Rex. We then turn to Titan having a discussion with an old Asian man who has a robotic lower jaw. This man is Mr. Liu. He's a part of an international crime organization known as the Order. Machine Head was also a part of this organization, and since Titan took over his empire, he now inherits the responsibilities that the membership entails. One of Mr. Liu's assassins, Multipol, is currently in prison within Titan's jurisdiction, so it's his responsibility to break Paul out. In the show, Titan is not at all interested in anything involving the Order and doesn't care about inheriting Machine Head's position. He only cares about the city. In the comic, Titan is well aware of his inherited position in the Order and is much more willing to work with Liu than Machine Head ever was. In the show, Titan's right-hand man Isotope has to explain to him why Liu is not someone to mess with. This entire side plot has been heavily overhauled in the show, as we will see in later episodes. Mark and Oliver fly over to Art's place to get Oliver his first superhero costume. It doesn't go well, as Oliver has decided to name himself Kid Omni-Man. Mark tries to explain to him that people are going to hear that name and associate him with all the horrible things his father has done on Earth. Art has also made Mark a new suit, completely black and blue, and Mark comments the suit feels pretty serious. This could be a reference to the fact that the creator of Invincible, Robert Kirkman, explained the change to the new suit was to represent a shift to one of the darkest eras of Invincible's career, in a way foreshadowing the devastating events to come. The new suit in the show differs slightly from the one in the comic. Like the comics, the new suit no longer has knee pads, which Art claims was dumb to begin with, because why does an indestructible hero need knee pads? But in the comic, the gloves are no longer fingerless as well. Art claiming they felt too much like something out of an 80s movie. But in the show, the gloves are still fingerless. Why? It could have something to do with the fact the technology in the show is more modern than in the comic, and I don't know if you've ever tried to use an iPhone with gloves on. It doesn't work very well. The two brothers hear over the radio that Peyton Penitentiary is being attacked by supervillains, and the two head out, Oliver promising only to watch. They arrive to find Furnace and Kursk, both henchmen of Titan, attempting to break out Multipol. Oliver immediately jumps into the fight and gets one-tapped by Kursk, before Invincible jumps in and knocks them both out. He then scolds Oliver again for getting involved in a situation where he could have gotten hurt. Oliver reluctantly apologizes after after Mark threatens to never take him out again. We then get a show-only scene of Debbie on a second date with Paul, where she admits the truth about Nolan, Mark, and everything that's happened to her. Initially thinking there's no way Debbie would be into someone normal like him, he almost gets spooked off before she assures him she's interested in going forward with their relationship. New scene, an adaptation of Eve asking to move back in. In the comic, this happens in a single page in issue 51, and is only between Eve and her mother, as her father is still mad at her for leaving to Africa with no more than a note explaining where she went. She asks her parents if she can move back in, and promises that at the very least, she'll no longer use her powers in the house. Mark and Oliver get home and find their mom making out with Paul. This plays out better than the same scene in the comic, since we've directly addressed the fact that she told him. The boys' last fight comes up in the news, and Oliver is scolded again for joining into the fight. Mark also learns that his new suit has confused the public as to who he is, so they're now calling him Invincible. We get another roof scene of Mark and Eve, during which we see a metal orb spying on them. We then cut to the same nuclear missile silo the Lizard League attacked last season. The Mauler twins have broken in and removed a warhead from a ballistic missile, before the Guardians arrive and try to stop them. The Maulers' plan is slightly different in the show than in the comic. They plan to detonate an EMP in orbit to knock out communication across the world, with the purpose of selling their own communication systems to world governments. In the comic, their plan is super impractical. They don't strap an EMP to a missile, and instead plan to just shoot a nuke at the sun to cause a solar flare to knock out communication. This plan is stupid for so many reasons. The main one being we can barely get nukes across the continent, let alone across the solar system. Solid adaptation. The Maulers created a weapon that targets the body's nervous system and easily takes down the third iteration of the Guardians of the Globe in a show-only fight scene that isn't half bad. Debbie tells Mark about the missile silo and he rushes over to help. He might not work for Cecil anymore, but he's going to do his best to protect the world anyways. When Oliver hears where Mark's gone off to, he quickly follows. The same weapon is pretty effective on Mark, but before the Mauler twins can put him out of commission, Oliver dashes in and saves him. And after the twins launch the EMP, Mark quickly goes after it. This is when Oliver punches one of the Maulers so hard, his entire jaw breaks. The other twin throws Oliver to the ground and turns to his brother. And as Mark stops the EMP, Oliver flies through the chest of one of the Maulers, killing him. The other Mauler twin, through his broken jaw, tries to surrender. Oliver tells him that it's too late to surrender before punching his head off, ending the Mauler twins for good. In the comic, this plays out a little differently. In the show, Oliver breaks the jaw of the first Mauler twin and bursts through the chest of the other, while in the comic, he chest bursts the same Mauler whose jaw he broke. The second completely uninjured twin tries to surrender, and Oliver knocks his head off. The Guardians stare in shock at what Oliver's done, as Cecil arrives. Invincible grabs Cecil, saying he told him to stay away from his brother. Cecil simply explains that he's just here to clean up Oliver's mess. And seeing that the Maulers are dead, Mark takes Oliver into the sky and yells at him for killing them. Oliver lies and says he didn't mean to kill them, but Mark is concerned about how he doesn't actually seem to care they're dead, justifying it by arguing the Maulers were bad people, which means he did something good. Oliver argues with Mark about the value of life and starts sounding a lot like Omni-Man, even saying he agrees with how their dad thinks. Mark then meets Eve in their backyard and apologizes for missing out on what was supposed to be their first date. Eve completely understands, having seen the missile attack on the news. This scene adapts the first few pages of issue 53, specifically to further emphasize how much better their relationship works since they're both heroes and both understand their responsibilities. But in the comic, they actually do go on this first date, where they have the continued conversation about Oliver. Eve calms Mark down on the idea of his mom's boyfriend knowing Mark's identity, while in the comic it becomes an entire fight with his mom that I don't think ever gets addressed again. Mark also has two conversations with Oliver in the comic about him not caring about killing people. The first going very poorly, and the second coming off like Oliver only pretends to agree with Mark because he knows if he doesn't, he won't be allowed to do superhero stuff anymore. In the show, Debbie's instead the one to talk to Oliver, as she tries to make him understand empathy, but Oliver still argues that the Maulers were less important because they didn't have anyone who cared about them, but eventually agrees that he won't kill again. During a family hug, Mark spots the same orb we saw watching him earlier. He quickly rushes out of the house and grabs it, but before he can get a good look, it explodes. And then it's revealed in a post-credit scene that the person spying on them is Angstrom Levy, who somehow survived Mark caving his head in. In the comic, Mark discovers the orb in issue 56 during completing completely different circumstances. But considering that issue 56 is the domestic abuse chapter and practically nothing else in it is adapted in the show, it makes sense they'd move it somewhere else. Episode 4 begins with another show-only scene of Rex and Ray. As the two are shopping for groceries, Ray explains that she wants a normal meal that she bought ingredients for and cooked herself, something she's not really accustomed to. But the shopping trip is interrupted by villainous activity. We cut to the Teen Team HQ where Robot is analyzing the orb Mark found spying on him. Robot explains that he can't tell who or what made it, but that it's from Earth and that the explosion was most likely designed to prevent people from discovering its origins. Mark then breaks into the Pentagon, believing Cecil's behind this, but Cecil explains that if he was spying on Mark's family, he'd never know about it. All of this so far adapts issue 57, but in the comic, we have an entire crossover plot involving the astounding Wolfman, who still hasn't made an appearance in the show. In issue 7 of the comic, Zechariah has killed his wife, and Wolfman has been framed for it. He is now training with the werewolf who turned him to become strong enough to get his revenge. During this training arc, he has a run-in with the Giant, who Invincible helps stop. But before taking Wolfman into custody, he listens to what he has to say and is convinced of his innocence. Cecil doesn't care to listen, however, so the two have to break out of the Pentagon, which happens in issue 11 of The Astounding Wolfman, and eventually leads to a fight with the new Guardians of the Globe. The story wraps up in a way that places Wolfman right back where he was in his story, meaning as a reader, you wouldn't have missed anything if you skipped the crossover. It doesn't affect Invincible's story either, so it makes sense they didn't adapt this. We've now jumped back to issue 54 of the comic, and instead of Mark leaving Cecil to go help stop the Giant and Wolfman, he heads to his second date with Eve, which is interrupted by the two martial artists who stole the Declaration of Independence in episode 1. They explain their names are Dropkick and Fightmaster, and that the two are from the future and need Mark's help to overthrow their king. Mark says he's not helping, but is rammed into the time travel portal before he can react. He's understandably angry these two just time-napped him, but they say they can prove they're the good guys, and after he helps them, he'll give them back the Declaration of Independence. After changing, another Mark comes through a portal and yoinks his clothes before fucking off. In the comic, Mark is way more willing to go with Dropkick and Fightmaster. As Eve looks upset their second date is being ruined. There also isn't any deal to return the Declaration of Independence, and it's practically assumed to just be gone. The two martial artists explain that centuries before their time, the planet was on the brink of collapse, till one man took control and brought order to it for quite a while. But over time, he became a mad tyrant, and eventually a rebellion was born to try and dethrone him. But none of their attempts to kill him have worked, including a rumor that ink from the Declaration of Independence could be used to make a poison that would work on him. While stealing it, they saw how strong Invincible was, so they thought he could be the person to help stop their king. After hearing this, Mark is worried that the king might be a Viltrumite, but the two brothers explain they don't even know what that is. In the show, they get the attention of the robotic Royal Guard, which Mark mistakenly begins destroying. In reality, they want to get caught so that they can get where they're going easier. In the comic, the Guard appears to be actual people in futuristic armor, and they immediately take the three into custody as they arrive in the future. The two martial artists are taken to be executed, while Mark is taken to the king. It's revealed the person who's been ruling as a tyrant for centuries is actually the Immortal, who's gone completely mad. He starts mentioning future events, including saying Mark looks thin and weaker than he remembers, asking if he's gotten sick again, and mentions how he thought they found a cure for whatever he had. Mark cuts him off and asks why he's been hurting people, to which Immortal says it's the only way he could get Invincible's attention to get him to come back. He yells at Mark for leaving him in charge, saying he's not a Viltrumite and that Mark is the Emperor and should have known it'd be too much for him to handle. Mark is understandably confused, asking Immortal if this is about Kate passing away. Immortal can't even remember Kate's name, explaining how he's had hundreds of wives over the centuries, outliving everyone he's ever loved. All of this plays out roughly the same way it does in the comic, just with more detailed exposition, and Immortal eventually asks Mark to kill him. Mark wonders why he can't just quit, with the Immortal explaining a king can't quit and that he needs to be killed to give the power back to the people of Earth. In the comic, he is much more selfish about his intention. He's personally tried to instigate his own murder, but it's failed every time. He really just wants to die, and now that Mark is here, he can finally have eternal peace and death by someone who's actually strong enough to kill him. When Mark refuses in both the comic and the show, a fight begins. Most of the exposition we've heard up to this point happens in the much shorter fight in the comic. In the show, the martial artists have freed themselves and enter the king's chamber. Immortal attacks them to try and coax Mark into killing him, which eventually works, as Mark rips the Immortal's head clean off his body. In the comic, the fight is much shorter, a single page of Invincible taking blows, as the the Immortal describes his future. Mark then loses his temper and rips the Immortal's head off. Now that the king is dead, the people are free to rule themselves, as Immortal has added a protocol to shut off all the robots after his death. Invincible is not very happy that he had to kill someone and asks to be taken home. Before they leave, he reaches into the past and grabs his clothing, and is brought back to the same exact moment he left. He explains to Eve everything he's been through, and begins to feel guilty about the death and destruction in the future that he believes was caused by his choice to leave the Immortal in charge. Eve explains how just like the future Eve Mark met isn't her, he's not the version of himself that let that happen. Mark is still upset he had to kill, but Eve says they'll get through it together. In the comic, Mark doesn't actually tell Eve what happened when he gets back, instead being vague about what he did and asking if she thinks he's a good person. It feels way less impactful how this played out in the show, Mark sorta just deciding to kill Immortal after a few threats about him harming more people. But in the comic, Mark loses his temper after the Immortal starts blaming everything that's happened on him. This builds onto the entire arc of Mark giving in to his more violent tendencies as a Viltrumite, which at the same time in the comic is contrasted by his father becoming more human. In both the comic and the show, Eve and Mark continue their date around the world, reminiscing on the past. They both express their love for each other before kissing as the credits roll. But we still have 20 minutes left in the episode. We've cut back to Mark's house where they've snuck into his room to smash. There's a running joke that starts in issue 23 about how this is a family title, and therefore we will move elsewhere to give Mark Grayson and his lover some privacy. This then leads into the first part of the Alan the Alien story, and now we use that same segue in both the show and the comic from Mark and Eve back to Alan the Alien in prison. Alan hears Nolan tell him goodbye, to which he smiles, finally ready to execute his plan. We get a short recap which expands upon some of his execution attempts, which all fail and only end up killing the guards trying to execute him. But now, Nolan's two Viltrumite executioners have returned, so it's time for Alan to break them out. As Nolan is slowly beaten to death, the two Viltrumites list his crimes, and when asked if he had anything to say in his defense, Nolan tells them to continue the execution. Meanwhile, Alan has broken out of his cell and begins freeing prisoners to cause a ruckus, and in the process he finds Battle Beast, the same Battle Beast who beat the absolute shit out of Invincible and Monster Girl in season 1. The only thing he's concerned with is if there's any worthy opponents for him to fight outside, and when Alan promises there are Viltrumites, Battle Beast joins him. The prison break is expanded on quite a bit compared to the comic, including Alan not being able to immediately find Nolan, but they finally stumble upon the execution, and Battle Beast is ecstatic to finally be facing off against a Viltrumite. Alan takes a lot more of a pummeling than he does in the comic, and seeing his friend being beaten to death, Nolan breaks out to save him. After other guards show up, Alan breaks through the hull of the ship, bringing the fight into space, where our flightless feline latches onto his opponent and refuses to let go as they drift off into space. Nolan and Alan team up on the other Viltrumite, eventually working together to cave his head in. In the comic, they cave his head in the same way, but instead of crushing him from the front and back, they crush him from the sides. The two aren't very sure where Battle Beast or the other Viltrumite are, but as the viewer, we see Battle Beast slowly yet relentlessly beating the other Viltrumite to death in the vacuum of space. Nolan brings up how Alan seems to have tricked him into helping by pretending to be close to death, before Alan points out that they should probably hurry and leave before backup arrives. Nolan explains there will be no backup, and reveals one of the closest guarded secrets of the Empire, that being there are less than 50 pure-blooded Viltrumites left in the entire universe. And this reveal is where episode 4 leaves off, after we see Mark and Eve 100% get found out by Debbie, which is how issue 55 ends. The first 4 episodes in some way have adapted issues 46 to 57. So far there's been a lot of jumping around to adapt the show into something more than a monthly comic issue. And while we still have 4 entire episodes to get through, this video is already extremely long, so if you want to see the comic comparison for the second half of the season, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you're notified when it comes out in a few days. Until then, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you on the next one.